it's really always been kind of this public-private partnership. And I would argue that organized crime came to dominate a lot of the American corporate landscape, but it took several decades, but it absolutely did happen. And so I think a lot of these figures that really should be seen as mobsters have managed to rebrand themselves as philanthropists. But again, the focus has been kept very neatly on Epstein and very neatly about very specific aspects of that case, not on the broader picture and what it might mean if someone has a tie to Epstein. Having a tie to Epstein doesn't mean that person is a pedophile. It doesn't necessarily mean they were sexually blackmailed either. In a lot of cases, I think it has to do with business and financial links. But if Epstein is a financial criminal operating on behalf of this blob of organized crime and intelligence, that deserves scrutiny as well. And there hasn't really been any interest in pursuing those links really at all. And I think there should be.
The digital world promises freedom, innovation, and opportunity. But behind this facade lies an invisible cage, one controlled by unseen forces of power and influence. In her explosive interview, Whitney Webb exposes how a carefully crafted system keeps society trapped in a virtual prison, one most people don't even know exists. For decades, power players with dark pasts have reinvented themselves as philanthropists, earning trust and access to elite circles. This strategic makeover has allowed them to infiltrate and manipulate public and private institutions. Behind the polished image of progress and goodwill lies a hidden web of alliances, secret deals, and unspoken agendas shaping our lives without our consent. One of the most chilling examples of this covert system is Jeffrey Epstein. Whitney Webb reveals how Epstein wasn't just a shady financier embroiled in personal scandals. He was a key player in a network tied to intelligence agencies and the world's most powerful individuals. While the media focused on his personal misconduct, the deeper story of how he helped sustain systems of influence and control went largely ignored. This isn't just a story about Epstein, it's about the system he represented, one that keeps people distracted while silently locking them into a digital prison. Let's watch clips from Whitney Webb's explosive interview to gain more insight. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for joining us again. Enjoy the video.
I wanted to ask you, is there an Epstein 2.0? Like, has somebody come in and filled that void, or did that entire operation die with Epstein?
Yeah, it absolutely didn't die with Epstein, but I think Epstein 2.0 isn't a person. It's software. It's online surveillance. That by the time, well after Epstein's first arrest and before his second arrest in 2019, really it was more, it's really all about technology at this point. And a lot of the same people that had been involved with Epstein are part of this network. Like Ghislaine Maxwell's father, for example, Robert Maxwell, were involved in intelligence-linked operations to backdoor, critical infrastructure in the United States. And there's been a long history of people trying to, obtain intelligence through surreptitious means. And so sexual blackmail for a long time was part of that. But once sort of the internet and technology came to dominate, our lives in the post-2000s era, it's not really necessary to have someone doing sexual blackmail in the way that Epstein did it. It actually is much less risky for them because they don't have to pay to help maintain someone's billionaire playboy lifestyle or, maintain the data obtained from sexual blackmail parties or any of these things. And there's a lot less risk involved. Epstein himself is a great example, sort of got outed that he was doing this kind of stuff in 2007, and they try and put it back in the bottle, but they can't quite really. And then it totally explodes, roughly a decade later. Again, so if you're doing it covertly through software, you not only know what everyone is looking and doing online, who they're communicating to, what they're saying, and if they have sexual deviances, for example, that's very easy to find online for certain people these days, and add that to the profile on you, which is ultimately what a lot of this warrantless spying in the post 9/11 era has been about. It's about profiling Americans for this basically this vision that was developed in the Bush era, but is coming to fruition now, nevertheless, that people seem for some reason to think the neocons are not in power. This vision persists of having sort of this pre-crime society where AI is preventing crime and preventing pandemics and preventing anything bad from happening ever before it happens, kind of thing. This has its antecedents back then, and a lot of this NSA warrantless spying is that. So it's about profiling people. So a lot of this, essentially everything you do online is sucked up and put in databases about, essentially every American. And this has been known for some time, but no administration, or Republican or Democrat, including, President-elect Trump, when he was in office the first time, there's been no effort to really effectively or meaningfully wind this down in any way. So in addition to that, with this kind of software having a back door into consumer computers or personal computers and commercial computers too, you can put criminalizing data or files on anyone's computer and also frame them. So there's, the potential for all sorts of mischief, for lack of a better word, trying to avoid swearing perhaps, but, terrible things that, they're enabled to do by technology, and the overhead for them is very, very cheap relative to what it would have been to sort of get the person they want to influence in a compromising situation with someone like Epstein, right? So I think it's moving to technology, and I think Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were very aware of that, because starting in the late 1990s, really 99 or so, they started to court very heavily people who would become the dominant Silicon Valley oligarchs of today. So like Jeff Bezos had a very intimate relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. The Google co-founders, particularly Sergey Brin, very cozy with Epstein. Both Google co-founders were subpoenaed as part of that U.S. Virgin Islands Epstein JP Morgan trial. So was Elon Musk. Reid Hoffman, very well documented, very cozy relationship with Epstein that involved visits to the island and the townhouse and all of that. Of course, there's Bill Gates, whose ties to Epstein, despite mainstream media's claims, go back to the 1990s, not to 2011 as they claim. I would argue that's because they're trying to absolve Microsoft of any potential compromise factor as it relates to Epstein, because that was at a time when Gates had officially left his formal role at Microsoft. And there is a lot of weird stuff about Epstein and Microsoft in the 90s and into the 2000s. And given that Microsoft is essentially ubiquitous globally and is the operating system on every computer, the fact you would have someone like that involved with them is pretty significant in light of what I was just saying earlier about the potential for blackmail and technology today. And so, by having these sort of relationships with these top figures whose services and programs for essentially are running our lives today, that's something that I don't think has been properly explored. So even though that Epstein there's the fact that Epstein does, as you pointed out, remain a cultural phenomena. I think a lot has been done to sort of maintain the spectrum of interest in Epstein's specifically on sex crimes and people who may be on the quote-unquote client list and things like that. And really, if you look at Epstein, he was not mainly a sex blackmailer. He was mainly, for lack of a better word, a financial criminal that facilitated financial crimes of very, very wealthy people and also of intelligence.
Jeffrey Epstein's legacy may seem like a thing of the past, but his influence has evolved into something far more pervasive. According to Whitney Webb, Epstein 2.0 isn't a person, it's a system. This system leverages digital surveillance and data profiling to manipulate individuals on a scale far greater than traditional blackmail ever could. Connected to tech elites like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk, Epstein recognized early on the growing power of technology. Today, every action online is tracked, creating what Webb calls a pre-crime society driven by AI. Webb warns that advanced surveillance and AI are reshaping the boundaries of privacy and freedom. For decades, intelligence agencies and tech giants like Google and Microsoft have built systems for mass data collection, creating detailed profiles that can be easily exploited. Predictive policing has added another layer of control, using algorithms to make critical decisions about individuals' futures, despite their often questionable accuracy. Webb describes this as a digital panopticon, where constant monitoring forces people into compliance and self-censorship. Though presented as innovation, she argues, This system erodes civil liberties and undermines the core values of freedom and democracy. Let's watch more clips from the interview.
U.S. intelligence can access people's devices remotely. And as I mentioned earlier, you have not only Epstein having all of these ties to what are now our biggest, the people that run or created the biggest companies in big tech, but a lot of those big tech companies were created with the direct involvement of our intelligence service. You have someone like Epstein who's operating on behalf of intelligence services. And I would argue that Epstein, not unlike Robert Maxwell, had his hands in more than one intelligence agency pie. I don't think it's necessarily fair to pin him down with one. But if you have him serving those particular agencies and those agencies want the quote unquote intelligence and use that to blackmail someone, and you have all these tech companies and the person you want to blackmail uses Google, uses Oracle, uses Microsoft or whatever, it's not very hard to be able to access all of their information. And a lot of things about these backdoors have been pretty widely established, and it's been something that's been going on a massive scale since the 1980s, at least. Maybe earlier, but we can definitely pinpoint key examples of it happening in the 80s and afterward. Well, so predictive policing, as it would be implemented now, would obviously involve an artificial intelligence algorithm. So basically, you would have to ensure that those algorithms are as close to 100% accurate as possible, and none of them are. So invariably, this AI or a pre-crime AI may say that you are likely to commit a crime and you're not, but how do you argue with it, right? Computer says. And a lot of the big, artificial intelligence thinkers in the security space, like ex-Google CEO Eric Schmidt, who ran the government's U.S. National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, he essentially argues that artificial intelligence is going to be, if not already, vastly superior to humans, and because of that, it thinks differently than humans and thus cannot explain itself to humans. It can't explain how it reaches a particular conclusion. And so, but because we should, almost religiously believe that AI is much more intelligent than humans, that we should accept its conclusions without question. Interesting. Definitely a good way for government to avoid accountability for all sorts of stuff with that type of logic. But as an aside, that would mean that if that's applied, that type of thinking is applied with an inaccurate AI in the law enforcement context, there's really no way to argue against it, because they'll be like, well, the algorithm says that you will. And you'll be like, but I won't. And I mean, how far do you think that would necessarily get you in the justice system if this is actually implemented on any meaningful level? It's complicated, and there's all sorts of things that could factor into that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these algorithms are known to be racially biased against certain socioeconomic classes. A lot of the ones previously used for law enforcement, if you live in a particular neighborhood with a higher crime incident, you're deemed, just by living there, more likely to commit a crime, right? Even if you have no plans to do so. And so there's all sorts of factors that are considered by artificial intelligence, but ultimately take, human agency out of the equation. And I think that's, quite obvious that that's troubling. And again, aside from biases, there's also the fact that AIs are known to hallucinate and just make stuff up that isn't real. And, there's been a lot of instances of that, particularly in the era of generative AI, where it's just, made answers that make no sense or like outright made stuff up in response to questions it's asked. That type of thing can happen with AI. And so, if you're going to outsource decision-making that can ruin an entire person's life to an algorithm that isn't 100% accurate, should we do that as a society? And again, it's very hard to know how accurate these programs actually are. So for example, if the company says it's 90% accurate, that's the company saying it. Is it independently vetted? Really, none of these statistics about accuracy are independently vetted. So for all you know, it could be 70%, 60% accurate. And a lot of time, as we know, people, when it's a contract, obviously it seems most likely in the U.S. context, such an AI would be given, it'd be contracted from a private company. There's a lot of cronyism there. So somebody knows somebody and they get the contract, even though they're not really the ones that were the best business for the contract, right? So maybe they have an even less accurate algorithm. So even if you have one that's, let's say, actually is 70% accurate, what do you do with the 30% of people they flag? And how do you determine their innocence if you're operating in a pre-crime scenario? It's definitely not good for civil liberties. And I think ultimately it's not necessarily going to reduce crime. Larry Ellison, who I mentioned earlier, was recently interviewed about how extreme AI surveillance like this will ensure that citizens are on their best behavior. And this is kind of the idea from which the name panopticon is derived, right? Which was originally a prison design. If you're constantly being watched and surveilled, even if you're doing nothing wrong, just knowing you're constantly watched will make you autocorrect your behavior, be on your best behavior always. But to me, that's inherently tyrannical and authoritarian and very bad, and definitely against what a lot of American values and constitutional values. And so I don't really agree with that vision for the future. But a lot of these people in elite circles think very differently than that.
The unchecked rise of artificial intelligence, coupled with political shifts, signals a precarious future for civil liberties and democratic processes. Whitney Webb's insights about the intersection of technology and surveillance are especially relevant as President-elect Trump prepares to dismantle AI safeguards implemented by the Biden administration. Webb has long warned that intelligence agencies and tech giants, such as Google and Microsoft, have exploited backdoors for mass data collection. In this new era, AI becomes a powerful tool for profiling, manipulation, and controlling narratives, often blurring ethical boundaries. The use of AI in elections, as highlighted by Trump's campaign, mirrors Webb's concerns about technology becoming a weaponized force. Campaigns employed AI for targeting voters and generating memes, while deepfake technology loomed as a potential threat. Webb's analysis of AI's role in eroding trust aligns with growing fears about how unchecked technological advances can shape political discourse and societal behavior. Without robust regulation, AI risks becoming an authoritarian tool that enables pre-crime policing and reinforces systemic biases, as Webb has cautioned. As Trump's administration promises to prioritize innovation over regulation, the risk of AI-driven misinformation and surveillance grows. Webb's depiction of a digital panopticon, where individuals self-censor under constant surveillance, feels disturbingly prescient. The absence of transparency and accountability in AI applications could erode democracy further, creating a society where technology suppresses dissent rather than promoting freedom. This moment demands critical scrutiny to ensure that AI serves humanity, not undermines it. As we wrap up, how do you think society can strike a balance between AI innovation and protecting individual freedoms? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video and hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.